कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकीनन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः। बुद्धिर्बलं यशो धैर्यं निर्भयत्वम् अरोगता अजाड्यं वाक्पटुत्वं च हनुमत्स्मरणात् भवेत्। पूज्याय राघवेन्द्राय सत्यधर्मरताय च भजतां कल्पवृक्षाय नमतां कामधेनवे। तपस्वाध्याय शुश्रूषा कृष्णपूजारतं मुनिं विश्वेशम् इष्टदं वन्दे परिव्राट् चक्रवर्तिनं। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम्. I am here to share my thoughts on the metaphysical dimensions of Atman as explored in the Bhagavad Gita. This paper studies how the Bhagavad Gita explains the self, Atman, and its relation to God, Paramatman, through Advaita Vedanta perspective. The verses examined are Chapter 2, 17 to 30, Chapter 3, 17, 27, and Chapter 5, 8 and 9. Chapter 13, 1 to 22, Knower of the Field and Supreme. In these passages, the meaning of the self shifts between the individual soul and the Supreme Self. This paper traces these changes and explains how Krishna reconciles them. In Dvaita Vedanta, the Jivatman is eternal and absolute, but always dependent on God. The soul does not become God in a liberation. It remains an individual servant sustained by divine grace. When Krishna teaches that the self is immortal, he refers to the unchanging nature of the individual soul, not its identity with Brahman. When he says that actions come from his gunas of Prakriti, it means that the soul acts under divine guidance rather than as an independent doer. In chapter 13, Krishna distinguishes finite knowers from the one supreme knower. Reading these verses through Dvaita Vedanta, the paper shows that the personal and supreme selves are eternally different yet united in a relationship of dependence and grace. This view preserves the individual soul's responsibility and God's supreme power, offering a theistic answer to questions about immortality, moral agency, and liberation in Gita. Introduction. This paper examines the concept of Nityatva, eternality, as applied to Atman, Prakriti, and Paramatman in Bhagavad Gita. Though all three share the attribute of being eternal, they remain distinct and hierarchical. The study explores how Krishna clarifies these differences while affirming their common eternal nature. Research problem. The question arises, if eternality is common to all three, how do we distinguish them without reducing them to one essence? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna addresses this issue by showing how the shared dharma of Nityatva does not erase the intrinsic differences among these entities. The soul, Atman, is eternally dependent. Prakriti is eternally mutable yet real, and Paramatman is eternally independent and supreme. By examining key passages of Gita, we can understand how this philosophical problem is resolved. The common attribute of eternality does not imply sameness of essence, but rather reveals a structured reality in which Paramatman reigns supreme, the Jiva remains subordinate, and Prakriti functions as divine instrumentally. Research question. How does the Gita articulate the metaphysical nature of Atman as both distinct from Prakriti, material nature, and Brahman? Literature review. Eternality of Jivatman and Paramatman. How do the terms Jivatma and Paramatma indicate that, although they share specific attributes, they are fundamentally different? The similarity between these two is not only in eternality or immortality, they also share qualities such as sattva, chitva, and anandatva. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 12, Krishna says, Natvevaham jadunasam, natvam neme janadhipaha, nachaiva nabhavishyamaha, sarve vayamatah param. It is not a fact that I did not exist at any time, nor you, nor these rulers, and surely it is not that we all shall cease to exist after this. Acharya Madhva, in his commentary, explains that the immortality of Jiva is given by Ishvara. He raises a question: why would Krishna speak about his own immortality, which seems unrelated? Madhva answers that Krishna is using himself as an example. Just as a Krishna's existence is not limited, he existed yesterday, today, and will exist tomorrow. The Jivatman also exists eternally. In Vedanta, God and soul share qualities like existence, consciousness, and bliss. This information seems to make things more complicated. How, if the Jiva and Paramatma share the same attributes and qualities, some might argue they must be the same. So, why do we say they are different? Are they two separate realities or only appearing as two when they are one? How can we know? To answer this, the same verse helps us. Krishna uses himself as an example, though he shares some qualities with the soul. This does not mean Paramatma and Jivatma are the same. Consider as an example. Suppose a potter carries 10 pots on his head, all made from the same clay, with the same texture, same size, and same shape. If someone says, because these pots share the same qualities, they are really just one pot, that would be absurd. If they were a one, if they were a one, the potter would not feel extra weight of 10 pots and could not sell more than one, since there would be no second pot to sell. This example shows that sharing qualities does not make two things identical. Acharya Madhva, in his Gita Tatparya, solves this problem with a reference from the Skanda Purana. It says, every jiva, before attaining the salvation, experiences union and separation from the body, that is, birth and death, but this does not apply to Krishna. Swadeha yoga vigamau nama janma mritipura ishyate heva jivasya muktehe natu hareh kochit. This question helps explain Krishna's words that the body and the Atman differ. The soul is not the body, and the body is not the soul. This cycle of joining and leaving the body, Deha Yoga and Viyoga, applies only to the Jivatman, not Paramatman. Why? Because it applies only to being bound to Prakriti, that is, to bondage. Krishna, being beyond bondage, is free from this rule. And Paramapurusha in Vedantic perspective. Does Paramatma have any relation with Prakriti? This question points to a hierarchy among the three entities. In the third chapter, verse 27, Ahankara vimodhatma kartahamiti manyate. The Gita explains how Paramatma is related to Prakriti, while action are carried out in every way by the qualities of nature. One who is deluded by ego thinks I am the doer. In this verse, Krishna mentions his role and connection with Prakriti. But if Paramatman is in any way related to Prakriti, then why does only Jivatman become bounded by it? Wouldn't this apply to Paramatma as well? The solution to this problem is also discussed in the same text. Both Jiva and Ishvara are called Atman. One is Jivatman and the other is the Paramatman. Why does one become connected with Prakriti and fall into bondage while the other does not? We must examine the deeper relationship between Jiva and Paramatma to answer this. The Bhagavad Gita presents a dynamic interplay between Prakriti and Paramatman that raises being reduced to mere identity or complete autonomy. A careful hermeneutic reading discloses a hierarchical relationship. Prakriti operates as a material cause of the cosmos, while Paramatma stands as its unchanging governor, sustaining and directing its functions without transforming. The Gita repeatedly distinguishes between the mutable and the immutable. In chapters 7 and 8, Krishna identifies Prakriti as a composed of the three guna, ceaselessly active and productive. This material substance accounts for cosmic evaluation and the embodied of being. Yet the Lord insists that although he pervades and upholds this nature, he is not bound by it. The very affirmation, I am the overseer and permitter of all actions, signals that Gita chapter 13:23 signals that Paramatma does not dissolve into the flux of the nature but rather transcends and regulates it. This relationship undermines any interpretation that collapses God and nature into a single undifferentiated principle. The text portrays Prakriti as a subordinate, instrumental, and dependent, while Paramatma is supreme, autonomous, and directive. Such language resists a purely monistic reading. Instead, Prakriti is empowered to act only because it is animated and sustained by the will of Paramatma. Krishna's assurance that he sends forth again and again this multitude of being under the same of nature. Chapter 9 verse 8 undercovers his role as an independent agent whose freedom is untouched by material necessity. Hierarchical framework has profound ethical and meta-ethical implications. Ethically, if Prakriti alone governed all action, individual responsibility would dissolve to determinism. Conversely, divine transcendence would vanish if Paramatma were identical to the natural order. The Gita avoids both extremes by partifying the supreme as immanent yet unconditional, directing but not confined by material causality. Embodied within Prakriti, human beings are called to recognize this transcendence and orient their action as service, Karma Yoga, acknowledging that their agency is real yet derivate. The doer who claims I alone act is deluded possibly because he ignores the enabling presence of Paramatma. At the same time, the one who attributes all power to nature fails to perceive it depends on divine governance. Metaphysically, the Gita's distinction between Prakriti and Paramatma grounds a vision of a reality in which the Supreme remains eternally free, unaffected by material change. The world cycles of creation and dissolution testify up to Prakriti's contingency contingence. Paramatma, however, remains the consensed witness, source, and controller, ensuring that cosmic order is not accidental but divinely willed. This view affirms that the material order is real, not illusory, yet incapable of existing apart from divine direction. Thus, the Gita yields a profoundly theistic ontology. Prakriti is the servant power, Paramatma the sovereign master. Their relation is as a material in nature and depends eternally on God, while God's being and freedom do not depend on nature. This hierarchy perceives divine transcendence and at the same time affirms the genuine activity of the world offering a metaphysical foundation for devotion, responsibility, and purposeful action. Conclusion. The analogy clarifies why the jiva gets bondage. The jiva, though eternal and conscious, is Anu, finite, while Paramatma is the Supreme Self, is Vibhu. Being finite, the Jiva's knowledge and power are limited. This limitation makes it prone to Ajnana and Dosha, opening the bondage to. In its embodied state, the Jiva mistakes the body mind complex, a product of Prakriti, material nature, for itself. When the Jiva says, I am the doer, Ahankara Vimodhatma Kartaham iti manyate, Ahankara Tattva, Brahma, it appropriates the activities of Prakriti as its own. This false sense of authorship gives rise to karma, action with binding results, which keeps the jiva in the cycle of birth and death. Material nature, Prakriti, functions under the control of Paramatma. However, since the jiva resides in a body made of Prakriti and engages with the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, it experiences pleasure, pain, and delusion. Paramatma perverts Prakriti as its governor but never becomes subject to it. The jiva, being dependent and conditioned, becomes affected. According to Dvaita Vedanta, the jiva's bondage is anadi, but not ananta. It presides until divine grace and power knowledge, tattvajnana, break the misdefinition. It presides until the divine grace and proper knowledge, tattvajnana, aparoksha jnana, break the misidentifications. Since Paramatma is always self luminous, he never falls into ignorance and therefore never into bondage. The dependence of the jiva on the Lord entails susceptibility to Prakriti's influence, whereas the Lord's absolute independence entails invulnerability. Thank you. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu.